Hey everybody, Big Toad here and welcome to the studio. Today we're going to work on a painting that for the moment I'm calling Hills of Idaho. I've already done the sketch in, as you can see. I just use a bit of color I had mixed in from the previous painting I worked on, and I don't find it matters too much what color I use to do my drawing. And rather than go right to the block in, I started just going right into the sky. What do I want the sky to look like? And then from there, I start pulling out all my values and setting up the rest of the painting based on my sky. So I want just a typical nice blue sky. So I put that in. I go with heavier paint. Now I'm looking for a color for those hills in the background. And again, I base that color off of my blue sky. I try to go with a really light color for those far hills. Now these are hills, these aren't mountains. So purple, I could use purple and it would look great, you know, a purplish hue, but this is more natural to the area in which I live, in the foothills of Idaho. And I can see hills like this, you know, walk out my door, and I can see them actually from my window when I look out. And so they're very large hills, and they're typically of this grassy, sagebrushy hillside. So that's what I'm putting in here. So I'm using this color, and this is, you know, a mixture of obviously titanium white, I'm using yellow ochre, some ultramarine blue. Then I balance it out with some alizarin crimson, and I work it down until I get this nice color here. And when I do this, I usually mix up more than one color, because I'm going to come in and put in some, here we go, put in a darker color to create some shadow and texture on that hillside back there. And it looks darker now than what it will when I put my other colors in. I'm careful to go really, really low value, light colors on the background. And again, I work forward. Kind of got the hang of that. You may want to block in your whole painting before you go to this step. But I'm using the Impasto technique here. I have no problem just painting right up to my blue and going right over the top of it. I have no problem going in with my highlight color, my shadow color right over the top of it. Now I'm looking for this green. It's a pale green. It's going to set in the back to represent the tree line up against the hills. And so I'm gonna go ahead and put that tree line in. And see, the sky is basically done at this point. The hill's done at this point. And now I'm going to finish off this background trees, and I'm modeling, I'm kind of blending, softening the edges of the trees into those hills, so they don't look overly. I don't want a stark line there, because that's way off in the distance. So I don't want a stark line. So I'm gonna fiddle around and blend those colors in a little bit, not too much, not trying to blend them away, just soften the edge of that color. And again, I'm going to come back in here in a minute with a darker shade of this, darker hue of the same color, a little less titanium white, and start putting some highlights. Here I'm painting back in. I want to give it, I'm painting back down into my trees with my hillside color in order to get a better shape. And I'm going to go up to my tree in the blue sky and do a little bit of that back end painting as well. As I said, the trick to doing this, painting this impasto method and going in right on top of thick heavy paint and putting more thick heavy paint on there, is the consistency of your paint. You want it to be creamy, you want it to be soft, you want it to just, the paint layer that's there to pull the paint off of your brush. I think you might try different brushes, but typically you're looking for, surprisingly, a little stiffer brush that allows you to control that pressure more evenly when you apply that paint. So as I said here, now I'm going back in and putting some highlights, some darker areas into my tree line back there. I'm trying to build out a little darker on the bottom and then bring some highlights up. This is not a complex process. This is pretty easy, you know, just keep those shapes and patterns random. Just think about where the trees are, where the shadows might be, And the reason I want the bottom darker is because there could be other ground foliage and stuff down on the ground, so that would be darker. That's where the most shadow is going to be at the bottom. So that's why I'm putting the darker color on the bottom. The important note about the colors I'm using so far is I really reduced the intensity, the chroma. I really grade them down, and it's going to be more apparent as I paint in more color, if I start putting in the groundwork and such. But the colors are really muted. Now, here's what I've done so far. Take a look at these and get a feel for the paint strokes and how I applied the paint, and just there's still randomness, and yet they follow the flow of the land and such. That's what you're after with Impasto. A mistake a lot of people make when they're doing their colors is they leave the intensity too high. The colors out of the tube are much more intense than typically what you want to paint with. And that's so you can take them and mute them down in intensity for how the value you want, but yet if you, in those cases where you need the high chroma, high intensity, you have it available. So how do you gray these down? How do you soften and mute that color? You go in with the opposite color on the wheel. So if you're trying to dechroma red, you're going to go in there with yellow and blue. You're going to try to dechroma blue, you're going to go in there with red and yellow. It's the opposite, and that's going to bring the gray down, and you just introduce that until you pull the intensity down to where you want it. So when I say I pulled the intensity of that background down, I did that quite a bit. Now here I'm just really just kind of blocking in now this foreground. I need this whole foreground blocked in, and I'm using a muted yellow ochre, a little darker. I wanted to start with a little darker there, trying to leave the outlines of the fence posts, because the fence posts are critical, so I'm going to kind of keep the perspective with those in line. But I'm going to go ahead and wipe out the cows I had in there. Now I come in, and you can just barely see it now. I'm coming in with another color, just slightly more brownish, darker, maybe a little more red hue in those, just to mark out my fence posts and my tree, and so I don't lose them. Again, this is just a base color, just to keep an eye on them. And now I'm going to put in those fence posts along there to keep my perspective up. And when you're painting, that perspective is important. You want to communicate that perspective, and to do that, you have to keep it in mind. So now I'm going to go in and just block in some cattle. Again, I'm going to create the impression of cattle. I'm not trying to get in there with a microscope and create actual cows that, I want to create the impression of them. So you know you're looking at a cow. And I'm going to leave some back there in the distance as well. And I'm going to go ahead and block in the tree and get those limbs blocked in there. Yeah, so a basic rule of thumb I like to follow is, going back to the topic of chroma and intensity, is bring that chroma down more than you think you need to, because you can always come back in and make it a little more intense later. But typically when I go and I say, okay, this is the intensity I want, now I'm going to go a little bit lower in chroma, take a little more intensity out, I don't regret it. I don't have to go back over and paint it in with a higher intensity. I might throw in a highlight, but that's what you want. You can put highlights in rather than repaint all that. So now I'm going to start putting in these trees. I'm going to start with the darks, and I'm going to use the same colors on these fence posts. Putting in a dark side, assuming that the sunlight's coming in from the left. And I don't want all my fence posts to be that dark. You can randomize the darkness of the fence posts as they go down. Focus a little bit on the limbs and the tree using that same color. A lot of that's going to be obscured somewhat by the foliage I put on there, so don't have to be too critical of that. But yeah, I want to put that in there. Now I'm going to use that color to just add another block in layer to my cows. And you see, I'm not trying to in one shot paint the cow. I'm going to go back in with color on color on color to slowly bring the image of that cow out. I don't want to over focus the cows in my mind, and I want to focus on I want to focus on layers. I want to focus on hues of colors to variety in the painting. So I'm going to go from fence post to the trees, back to the cows, and back again, putting in that light color on the fence posts, not overworking it, not trying to leave one solid mark. I load up the sharp front edge of the brush for those fence posts. Now I'm putting in a little bit on the cows. These are not black and white cows. We have black and white cows in Idaho, but believe it or not, we probably have, and out in the fields, you'll see more cows that aren't black and white. But black and white cows are easy to paint, because when you see a black cow, a black object out there with a little bit of white in it, you know it's a cow, because we see a lot of those in paintings. Now I'm using that same color on those rocks to put a sunny side on those rocks. Now back in with an even lighter color on the sunny side of those fence posts. And I'm going to use that everywhere as well. Just slowly bring life to the painting. These layers of colors. I enjoy it. I think it's fun to put those layers of colors in. Kind of tap in a little bit of color on those fading away fence posts. I want to keep those. I'm not going to put those as bright because they're so far away. Now look how this tree comes to life when you put that lighter color against that dark. And the same with the cows. I'll put a little bit of that on the cows and the other tree. And look how that just brings life, vitality, movement. You can see the individual brush strokes. And there's my shoulder. Great shoulder. I use it all the time. Yeah, I just haven't mastered sometimes the art of painting without getting my shoulder in front of the camera. Sorry about that. But that's, part of the process of learning to do these videos. And sometimes I just got to get up close. Now I'm going to start off the trees with a dark green. And the best way to get to a dark green fast, ultramarine blue and yellow ochre. And that produces a really nice natural dark green. And you can start from there, and you can bring the chroma down, and you can bring the intensity down. You can lighten up the hue into lighter and lighter greens, and then you can shift that green by adding in cad yellow light or cad yellow mediums to move it away, make it a little brighter. So you can do lots from that starting point. Bring in some alizarin crimson if you want to, and those lighter colors to bring in some other intensities to it. You can mix in a little bit of burnt sienna. You can do lots of things with that green from there. Experiment with it. So again, the brush strokes, you see the thickness of the paint. Impasto painting. I'm allowing that paint to tell a story, to create movement, to create leaves and the illusion of leaves in the trees. Not just counting on the color. Now I've introduced a lighter color of green. And again, to create depth, to create more movement in the illusion of leaves. I decided I needed a darker color, so I mixed up a darker color of green. And I'm putting in the deeper, darker colors. There's a lot of deep, dark colors in trees. If you look at them, if you look beyond the brilliance of maybe the leaves that are most evident, you'll see almost a black in the depths of those leaves as you go layers and layers back deeper into the foliage. Like I said earlier, the intensity, the chroma of the color is often what gets people in trouble with their paintings. They look too cartoony. And the other thing is not enough darks. Now look at this deep, dark, rich color. And look at the brush strokes and how it's creating the illusion of leaves and depth. This impasto method allows you to just be bold with those strokes. Be bold with the paint you're laying down. I'm an oil painter. I love to see oil paint. I love to see the impasto brush strokes. I love to see this depth created by the paint itself, not just the color. And now I bring in a lighter color with more chroma, more intensity to create more depth and movement and vitality to the painting. You see, you save those higher intensities for later in the painting to just add to what you've got, to draw the eye, to again, create the movement, the vitality. You'll see me sometimes test a few colors, put a little bit on the painting to see if they're what I want. Now I'm going in over this block-in color for the ground, and I'm looking for a color that's going to be that's going to bring life to that field. And I've mixed up multiple colors for the ground, darks for the shadows, lights for the lightest, then a medium color. So I usually, when I start like a big area like this, like all this ground cover, I start in with multiple colors mixed up, so I can use them to create variety within my painting. And so a big long field like this with different kinds of grasses, and, you know, it's not flat out there, it's bumpy, it's hilly, that I can use those different colors to create the illusion of, you know, the dips and turns and mounds and holes and various variation in the ground in the color. Now I've moved to putting darker colors on the tree trunks. I've got further enough along with the ground cover to realize I need to create some more contrast in my trees, so I tested out a color there, and I'll move back and forth between the ground, various colors, bringing in contour, working around my cows back there. This is what I call a comfort painting for myself. And I think every artist needs a comfort painting, something that they're confident in, something that's going to be relaxing and peaceful for them, that's not overstretching their creative side. Now, you do need to stretch your creativity, but for instance, I just came out of a very difficult painting, and it put a lot of extra stress on me, reworking to try to get that painting where I wanted it. And so after a laborious painting like that, stretching my abilities, trying to learn new techniques, I wanted something easy. So I went to a comfort painting. This is comfort because I know the scenery, I know the colors and the kind of mixtures I'm going to put into it. There's no surprises in here. It's all things I've done before, and so it's very relaxing, very peaceful, very satisfying. I'm not perfect at it yet. There's still skills within this painting that I can hone and get better at and learn. So I am trying slightly different hues in this than I have in the past. Again, that's the stretch I'm making, on slightly different hues. As far as where I got this image, this one's one I created from the top of my head. I've just seen so much of the beauty of Idaho, and I just thought about what would make a great composition that would be relaxing for me to paint. And I had this sketched up in my sketch pad, and so I pulled it out and said, yeah, this will be it, this will work. So all off the top of my head, but nothing here in this painting that I haven't seen before. I've seen trees, I've seen cows, I've seen fences, I've seen hills, I've seen rocks, and so I just incorporated the elements, the things I knew, and created this composition. And I think that's fun too. When you come up with a composition, draw it up. Take a look at this photo of Rembrandt's painting, Storm on the Sea. Do you think he was on another ship with his plein air setup, sitting there painting this in the midst of the storm? Of course not. He knew what the ocean looked like in a storm. He knew what the little ship looked like. He knew what frantic sailors looked like. He took all of this from his imagination of things he'd seen before. See, what the imagination is taking what the brain has already collected and reorganize it into something new. That's what imagination is. You can't create new colors, you can't create new shapes. All you can do is take what you've already known and revamp it. And so that's what Rembrandt did here. He wasn't there in the sea painting this. And so as an artist, when you can get to that point where you ran out of things to paint, well, what do you know? What can you bring out of the imagination of your mind? What can you bring from your own past to create and paint? And the great artists have done that, and you can do it too with practice. Okay, I know I'm not Rembrandt, and I know you're not either, but that doesn't mean you can't use your own experiences, your own imagination to create compositions uh, from the things you know. And that's what I've done here, and I think you can do it too. Now I'm using a very small flat brush here to start painting in the shadow of that tree. Shadow is important in your paintings, especially landscapes. There's not a landscape that doesn't have some kind of shadow in it. So you need to really think about shadow in your painting and where that looks, because that's gonna take your paintings to the next level. Is good shadow development and making sure you have them in place. And I'm breaking up the shadow with some light colors too, because I don't want a solid clump like it's one big round solid tree. So I put some light colors in there where light's shining through the foliage of the leaves. And I'm still using my smallest flat brush in order to work around the stones and objects I have in my painting. I really only used about 3 brushes, 3 flats of this very small flat that I've been using. I have a flat that's a little bit larger and one a little bit larger than that. This is only an 8x10 board, so I don't need the giant, bigger, 1-inch flats. And I'll remind you again, you've got to keep that paint creamy when you're painting impasto. So the first time you touch that brush to the paint that's already there, if you feel it going on wrong, or if it doesn't lay out the way you want, it's probably not creamy enough. And how do you make it creamier? Typically, I introduce some linseed oil a little bit at a time until I get that creamy texture I want. You can also use your turpentine or terp substitute to make it creamy as well, and that will cause it to dry faster. So here's my finished painting. I used a palette knife to put the barbed wire, 3 strands of barbed wire on my fence. Fences typically have 3 strands. If you're not used to being in the country, you may not know that. I used my palette knife to create some of the taller grasses around my rocks, tree stump, and the base of the trees, and a little bit around also some of the fence posts. I don't want to overwork that. I also use my palette knife to put in some light green kind of out in the pasture to, again, create some vitality and life to it. Just load up the palette knife and just ease that paint on there a little bit at a time. And you'll notice the rocks, I added some more to the rocks. I put a little more gray in there, put some of the darker. You'll see the dark color I used on the side of the tree there. It needed some more dark in the bark. I used some of that on the fence posts as well as the stump and those rocks. I also introduced a little bit of blue, some ultramarine blue on the side, the shaded side of those rocks. Not the bottom, the dark, but in the shaded side. I like that little bit of blue. I put a little tiny bit of that blue on the sunny side of those trees as well. And the cattle, again, I used the dark I used in the tree on the underside of the cows to, again, create texture and roundness to their shape. The darkest dark was made with ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. That makes a really nice dark alternative to like an ivory black. Try to avoid ivory black. I find you get the ultramarine blue and burnt sienna mixture together, and it creates a really nice, rich, shadowy dark color, which I used as well. You also see a little bit of blue on the nearest couple fence posts. I think that adds something nice to the painting overall. You also notice on some of those taller grasses around the rocks and the tree, I used straight cadmium yellow light and cadmium yellow medium to add a little bit of flowers to them. So you can zoom in on there and see those flowers, just tapping it in, really some small highlights to add a little bit of color to the painting. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you've learned something, and I look forward to seeing you in my next session. Hey, this is the Big Toad, and I am out.